Since the trade war began in 2018, there have been a flurry of tariffs from both sides, targeting the automotive industry, including up to 25% tariffs placed on automobiles and their parts. These have affected the overall trade of vehicles and parts between the US and China, with a decrease in total trade of 27% comparing the beginning of 2018 to 2019. There was a period of reduced tension at the beginning of 2019, with most tariffs on automobiles at least being lowered temporarily. However, a sudden increase in tensions has again ignited this trade war, and more 25% tariffs on automobiles and parts have been threatened. This leaves a tumultuous and uncertain environment for the foreseeable future. Even a brief look at the headlines shows the complexity of the issue. As companies look to reroute their supply chain or shift manufacturing to avoid being hard hit by tariffs, this may leave opportunities for several countries to compensate for the shift in trade. A look at the first 6 months of 2018 compared to the first 6 months of 2019 shows a 12% decrease in US imports of parts and vehicles from China compared to a 16% increase in imports from Mexico, suggesting a significant shift in the trade flows. China and Mexico are key suppliers of auto parts to the US. US imports of parts for China have decreased over time compared to previous months. Meanwhile, US imports from Mexico have consistently increased over the same time period. Auto parts can be wide-ranging, from safety airbags to road wheels. Luckily, the commodity breakdown from Mexico and China show that both countries export similar parts to the US, namely parts and accessories of bodies and parts and accessories for motor vehicles. This implies a high potential to swap like for like. A closer look at the imports of these two specific commodities into the US shows the value imported from China and Mexico seem to mirror each other. As imports from China decrease, imports from Mexico increase, suggesting a shift in trade to avoid tariffs. Given the established shift in trade, a closer analysis into the states and ports of the US which will be affected has been carried out. The US imports of auto parts from China has been broken down by port. Both Los Angeles and Long Beach appear to be the major players when it comes to imports from China, which is not surprising given the strength of the auto industry in the state of California and their geographical location on the west coast of the United States. Comparing the imports into California from China and Mexico since 2017 shows a general decrease in imports from China from mid-2018 and a general increase in imports from Mexico. This is important and suggests companies are already diversifying their supply chains. Most trade between the US and Mexico is land-based. The trend in land-based transportation mode for Mexican exports to the US shows an increase in exports from 2018 through to 2019. This supports the theory that trade is shifting from China to Mexico. The Mexican regions that are key in exporting parts to the US are shown on the right. These might expect to see increased activity with such a shift in trade. Given that lots of this trade is by land transportation, we would also expect different carrier companies to see increased activity, with trade shifting from seaborne to land-based. The top land-based carriers that may see increased business opportunities are shown on the right. Using our data, we are also able to look at the companies which will be affected by the tariffs. On the left are the domestic companies in the US that are importing parts and accessories from China. These are the companies that may be expected to be affected by tariffs the most, as they have a dependency on China for parts, and so these companies may benefit from diversifying their supply chain. Looking at one of these companies, Kurt Manufacturing, we can see a decrease in their imports from China, suggesting they are already diversifying and sourcing parts from other regions. On the right are the US companies importing the same parts from Mexico. These companies may be lesser affected by the tariffs, as their supply route is less dependent on China, and they already have facilities to import from Mexico. A company to take a closer look at is Caterpillar, as it appears in both the imports from China and Mexico. The tons imported from China decrease a lot in 2018 as Mexico grows, and the values seem to mirror each other. Again, during 2019, the imports from China vary up and down as tensions vary, suggesting that companies like Caterpillar, who have strong supply chains in Mexico, are able to be resistant and resource easily. Here are the Mexican companies that are already exporting to the US. These companies are expected to be increasing their exports to the US to capitalise on a shift in trend, as you can see with Novem Car Interior. It is possible that companies are importing from China to Mexico and then transporting on to the US to skirt around the tariffs. Looking to the future, what do we expect to happen to the auto industry? The forecast shows continued growth for China and Mexico in line with GDP growth. However, this forecast does not input political tension or tariffs as a driver, and so it's likely that this might shift. The trade balance between China and Mexico describes the difference between the amounts imported from Mexico and China. A negative value indicates a stronger dependence on Mexico. The predicted large shift of -5% for 2020 suggests a strong Mexico reliance. Given this predicted shift towards a reliance on Mexico, will we start to see an even larger increase in companies diversifying their supply chains and customer base?